So, Heidi, we were in our family foundations class, and my friend mentioned that we live really close to Indiana. We just hop across the border and we're there. She said that the Indiana reading scores are so low that they're appointing it's not really a czar of reading, but like a person whose sole job is to oversee the reading in the schools. And then NPR just came out with a news article saying that two-thirds of the third graders in Indiana can't pass the reading tests. And so they're actually talking about the legislature actually passing a law making you can't move them forward. Then this is the crazier thing was my friend who was there. She said that when her son was in school, he was not going to pass the reading test. There's just no way. He's got learning disabilities, and that's one of the big reasons why she chose to homeschool him. And he's a great kid and is doing really well. But so the teacher literally got the test and had him memorize the test. And she said for 3 weeks straight, they made him practice this test so he could have it memorized. And then they even told the kids to write the answers on their desks, and they passed out the test to the kids. And so, her son passed the third grade reading test, but only because the teachers basically taught him how to cheat. And she said that was one of the big things that pushed her over the edge to homeschool. And she's like, wait, you're teaching my son it's okay to cheat because you need him to pass this test so that your scores look better, so that the school gets more funding. So this was this huge ripple effect. So you're always hearing from people the education system's just broken. And I mean, you hear it over and over and over again. Millennials whine like we were gypped, and Gen X's are always, or I guess the Gen Z or the Zoomers, they're always saying, this sucks, and my teacher's this way, and teachers are throwing their arms up in the air these days. So, why? My question that I want to talk with today is why do you think that it's broken? Like, what is so broken about the educational system, and what can we do to fix it, if anything?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I actually left traditional academia, even though I was a teacher for a homeschool charter school. So we had so much more freedom and everything, but it was even with a homeschool charter school whose focus was freedom and teaching kids to their learning style and all of that, I still was constantly coming up against these issues where I couldn't I couldn't actually educate the kid. I couldn't work with these families to truly educate them because, you have to do this or you have to do this. And I mean, talking about standardized tests, it's gotten to the point where some of these standardized tests, you can actually put the correct answer on a test and get it wrong because you don't put you don't put all of the information on there that they are looking for. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It is so broken. It is insane. And I really feel like we are just ripe for education reform right now because it is so broken. The only way we can really make a difference, really fix it, is to basically scrap it and start over. But really, I really feel like in order to do that, we have to figure out what we did right and what we did wrong. When were we doing it right? What were we doing then? And I mean, we have to look back at our history. There's always cycles to history. And what was our cycle of history for education? What were we doing before that worked? And
Yeah.
why were we doing it?
Well, the founders always they taught you can't have a well-functioning democracy without an educated base, right? They understood that. And if you look at the history of education for before America came along, before democracy like we have now were a thing, the vast majority of education was the peasants learned the basic skills of labor, and then the elite were taught with tutors and in their homes, right? And they were taught a certain way within a small group. And you don't really see the mass education becoming a thing until Horace Mann in the 19 well, I mean, it became a community thing. You'd have community schools or the one-room schoolhouses, but the vast amounts of public schools and mandatory attendance of these public schools wasn't really a thing until like early 1900s. So we've
Mhm.
really only been doing this mass forced education for like 100 years, 120 years, right? We haven't actually been doing it that long. So it's kind of an experiment in and of itself, just to be able to like, okay, and we used to have a different way. It was super interesting. I don't know if you like to read Ronald Dahl or have read any of his stuff. My kids love him. So anything we can get Ronald Dahl, they read, and we've read them all multiple times. But we found this one book. It was called Charlie's Medicine or something, and it's a story about how this little boy gets has to watch his grandma for his dad who works on the farm, and so he tries to turn his mean old grandma into something else by making this concoction of her medicine, and it's absolutely hilarious. It's so funny. I mean, it's totally Ronald Dahl. But one of the things that the epiphany I had while I was listening to this was, generational education was a big deal. So much of what you were learned until you were like old enough to attend those schools, which usually wasn't until you were 8 or 9, was from your grandparents at home in the kitchen, doing chores, doing those things. Education like we know it in the formalized sense really didn't happen to children until they were like 9, 10, and then that's when they started going to one room schoolhouse. I just read Farmer Boy, and the first time that he didn't want to go, but he had to go to school was he was 8 years old. And so that's a very interesting thing is this kind of an experiment we haven't really seen before. And then the other thing that's interesting that I'm just connecting dots, but I recently read a book called The History of Perfectionism. And it wasn't like this self-help book. It was a book about precisionist engineering and how precisionist engineering has revolutionized the world we live in today. But one of the things that he talked about was the development of the automobile. And in Europe or in England, you had the Rolls-Royce company. And Royce was this really brilliant engineer. And he was obsessed with the beautiful and the meticulous. And so he started driving cars were originally made in France. England didn't really have a production. And this is like 1901, very beginning. So he decides he's going to build his own car because he wants one. And he's a machinist. He worked on engines like for the trains. And so he builds himself this beautiful engine and this beautiful car with the team of people he had working for him. And then this guy, Rolls, he's like, let's manufacture this. And so they started manufacturing it. But Royce said, we have to use the best engineers and everything has to be made with specific tools to specific, specifications. And they made beautiful engines, right? Then across the country, you see the same exact thing happening in Ford's factory. But what Ford did was he made it so that his parts, so his engineers didn't know anything and couldn't do anything other than one simple action, but his parts were specifically made. So then each part could be put together in precisely. So they each used precision. One was like the precision of the individual being able to replicate and make something, and the other one was the precision of the part. And the result was it took Rolls-Royce 6 days. They could make, when they were going full speed, they could make 6 cars a day. And Ford could make a Model T could come off the line every 6 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, so the difference was at scale, right? And the Model Ts were pretty reliable. I mean, for the most part, they didn't have the precision and the beauty and the experience of driving like a Rolls Royce. That's a totally different experience. But I kind of, as I was reading that book, I realized is like, what if America tried to take that same mentality of we need this done at scale? And so we have a population of like right now I think it's closer to 350 million. So we need to educate 100 million people every year, and or maybe we don't have that many people in the elementary and high school and stuff, but versus like if you look at another country like England with a population that's closer to maybe 30 million, we're playing with what bigger numbers. So we're just like, let's just produce it like a factory. Let's just make every single thing like pop out exactly the same because that's what we need. We just need it to be done. And so I wonder if like our intensity as Americans to be able to produce quickly and at mass scale trickled into how we taught education. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. Definitely that it did, because even now, like I said before, I had to leave because of all of the standardization. There were so many things that I had to do for every single child to make every single thing the same key assignment, same things that every child had to do. And it eliminated any of the individuality. And when you do that, I mean, you have 4 kids, I have 5 kids. How many of those kids are exactly the same? I even have identical twins. And they are so different. They learn differently. They're inspired. They're motivated by different things. And when you try and put all of those square pegs into a round hole, or, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from Einstein is, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its entire life believing that it's stupid. And I really feel like one of the biggest reasons our educational system is failing is because we have so many fish trying to climb trees. And instead, we should be allowing them to swim and the eagles to fly and the deer to run and let the monkeys climb the trees, you know, and the squirrels, and, you know, even have a different way of evaluating that monkey and the squirrel. They're still doing the same thing, but they're doing it differently, and allow them to do things differently. And we're just
Well, actually, as you're talking, it made me think maybe it's because like we really don't have a very good objective or end goal. Like if you were to think like what's the end goal of someone who leaves high school?
I can tell you, I mean, the end goal is to check off all of these boxes and have all of these standards met. The standards are to make it easier for the educational system to evaluate itself. That is what it's doing. It has to have some way of saying, basically proving its worth, that it is actually accomplishing what it's supposed to. But it's not about the kids. It's about some bureaucrat that has determined, either on the state or federal level, what a child needs, what every child needs. And
But
they aren't
needs for what? Like for what? What's the purpose? What's the need for?
exactly. It's it's just
Just
to
to check a box
basically,
off.
just to validate the public school education existence, that system's existence. I mean, that's as far as I'm concerned.
So like literally there's no reason
Well,
beyond ticking the box for you to like get everything done for high school.
I feel like, yes, they feel that this is what every child needs to be successful. But
Okay,
yet,
so success. So you're saying if you tick all these boxes, then you'll be successful,
supposedly.
supposedly. But see,
But
that's the thing is like millennials were like, we ticked all those boxes and our life is screwed. Like
yeah,
everyone's like, it doesn't matter how many boxes you tick, you went to college, you got the good grades so you could get into a good college, and now you can't even like have the things that you were promised or have the lifestyle that you want. Like it's not equaling success. Like ticking boxes to get to a certain place is obviously not working, and people are miserable, and it's showing up in so many facets of people's lives, their home lives, their dating lives, their mental health is horrible. It's deplorable. I mean, the amount of people who are on antidepressants just so that they can wake up every morning and go to work is through the roof. Like, so we've clearly failed, and I think we need to go back to like what's the purpose of education? Like, why are we spending every hour, like, an average American child spends 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. In other places in the world, they spend even more time. What's the whole point of this purpose of education? And if we go back to you could say the father of education, or the Western father of education, if you go back to Plato and Socrates, the whole point of education is to obtain the good life. Right? He says the whole reason why you strive to understand the unknown and discover the world around you is to discover what the good life is and then discover how to live it. And that's so much more than learning all these objective facts in fourth grade history. Or it's, and so to me, it's like the reason why so many people in my generation feel gypped, feel abandoned, and are literally struggling to get through the day is because we set the goal completely wrong. And we said, check these boxes off to achieve this status instead of saying, get out, look at the shadows have been playing on the cave's wall, walk out and see the real sun,
Yeah.
experience the good life.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like, that mentality of checking off these boxes, a lot of those boxes are really good. They're they're learning things that are very valuable, but they're also learning that you check off the box and it's done. You never revisit it. You never go back and you aren't developing that love of learning and that desire for education and that desire for growth. Checking off boxes isn't growth. It's just, you know, taking one step. It's not. And there are amazing teachers out there that are working within the system and doing amazing things. And I mean, I have 2 graduate degrees. I value education, but I'm just so frustrated with that mentality because I mean, really, when you think about it, the father of American education would be like Horace Mann. Why did he set up education the way he did? He went to, what was it, Prussia, and was so enamored by their system, which was basically producing soldiers. He decided to come back here and produce factory workers. One of the reasons all of these kids, all of these generations are not happy with their education was designed to produce factory workers, and they don't want to be factory workers. Okay, factory workers need to just be able to follow directions to check off the boxes. What do we need today? We need to get off that conveyor belt. We need to have this mindset shift because that conveyor belt doesn't work. It does not develop the people that we need, especially for this unknown future that we're going towards. And our kids need it because all of these mental health issues, I mean, a mindset shift would do wonders for them. I mean, really, what is that? Cognitive behavioral therapy? Is that the correct term?
Yeah, CBT, cognitive
Yeah,
behavioral therapy. Yeah.
I've been listening to Coddling of the American Mind. We're going to be doing a colloquium with my son's class on that book, and he talks a lot about how these generations are having so many issues because they've been coddled, and how one of the ways he actually was able to see that what was happening in these different educational systems, mostly at the college level, was he was able to see how they were basically telling these students and telling these young people that, you were supposed to do these things that were actually exactly the opposite of what cognitive behavioral therapy that it tries to help. So it's like the exact opposite. So they're causing these issues instead of solving them. And so that's why I think we really just need to trash the old system and start new, because it's just been so warped at this point. Even though, I mean, there is a lot of good there. We just need to, I just don't know how to get anything good out of it. Just one of the reasons I homeschooled my 5 kids, but yeah.
I think even as a homeschooled parent, I think a lot of people who choose to homeschool, just from my experience, is a lot of it is reactive, right? This isn't working, either like my kid's getting bullied or this don't agree with what's the agenda of the school, or they're falling behind academically. And so they choose to homeschool as a reaction to what's not working, right? I mean, and I don't blame them. I mean, like homeschooling is not easy. It's exhausting. It's a full-time job plus some because you have to do everything you have to do as a parent and then as a full-time educator, it's exhausting. So but one of the things I feel like is something that happens with homeschoolers when they choose to start homeschooling is it's like, okay, so I'm going to be in charge of my child's education, and the end goal is success. And that's achieved through checking off these boxes that the state or whatever is telling me that I have to check off, right? So then they look at their child and they are like, okay, I got to check off this box and this box and this box at this age and this age and this age. And then what ends up happening is there's a lot of conflict in the homes. There's a lot of problems with behavioral problems. The parent gets burnt out. And frankly, I don't know a single homeschool parent who has been able to homeschool more than one child. I think you can do it with one child, but more than one child and match every standard in every year. And I don't even know, I can't even, I think there's one person I know who could do that with one child.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of makes sense. I think there are certain people who can fit the standards and who will be able to do all those things and excel in that area and can pass all those things at that age, like that deadline they say they are. I just think most of the kids can't. And so I think, yeah.
Why do we want them to?
Well, it's because we bought the lie that this is the goal. The goal is the success. The success is achieved through this process. So you have to like immediately reset the goal. No, that's not the goal. The goal is now the good life, which is achieved through, in my opinion, this is the whole foundation of what education needs to be. The whole foundation is, what does it mean to be a human and to live the best possible life as a member of my community, family, society, and for myself? That needs to be the purpose of education. If people are like, okay, well, how does that work? How does that work career-wise? Well, if I view my career as a 9 to 5 and a paycheck, I am going to be miserable. I think there's a few people who can do that. And I'm not saying there aren't people there, but for the majority, people can't have their entire objective in life be, I go here, do this so that I can get a job, so I can get money, so I can do this. Like, eventually people burn out. But if I view my 9 to 5 as me with my skills and talents and abilities building something better, like if I choose to be a plumber, let's say I just was a plumber, and I could have the mindset of every day I work to ease the burden of life on other people.
Yeah, you're incorporating that calling, that mission, that purpose within that. Have you ever watched that show? What was it? Undercover Boss?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that are just amazing. And I remember there was one where he was the boss of some amusement parks and he went and he was talking to this guy that just cleaned up the park throughout the day. And he had such an amazing attitude of what he was doing. And then there was another one who was a garbage man. And again, I mean, here he is dealing with people's waste products, and both of them were. And they were able to see it as just improving the world and their way of making the world a better place. And I really feel like if we were able to share that mindset as one of our primary goals as educators, both in the homeschool setting and at large, but if we were able to share that, imagine how much better the world would be, that you have something special to add to this world and you are doing something amazing, whether it's producing this amazing work of art or sweeping the stairs so that people don't trip on garbage, or making food at McDonald's.
Yeah,
It's
like
still,
one of my favorite poems by Wadsworth is The Builders. I think I've shared that with you before, but all are architects of fate working in these walls of time, some with massive deeds and great, and some with ornaments of rhyme.
oh, I love
Nothing
that.
useless is, each thing in its place is best, and what seems but idle show strengthens and supports the rest. He was a big transcendentalist, which is so interesting because, the transcendentalist movement happened kind of at the same time that I think you see this push towards education, Horace Mann. I mean, he was later, But they were trying to answer these questions and this new founding democracy of what do we do now that we don't have this class of people known as the aristocracy who run the government and all those things. Like, how do we ensure that the populace are educated enough to run themselves, right? Which is biggest reason why Montesquieu was like, democracies are evil because, they can be pretty evil. We saw some pretty bad things, like they killed Socrates. So, of course, the transcendentalists really nailed this idea. Henry Thoreau goes out to Walden's Pond and like sits by a pond and living off the land for like months to experience what that is. And Emerson, he has a really amazing talk that he gave in a university called The American Scholar. And in there, he pinpoints, I think, the essence of what is great about America. And if we could keep, this is what makes it so that we can have freedom and have a country. But he says, within every human is this innate desire to do and be something great. He says, he calls it greatness. And the article is called Greatness. That's what he calls it. And he said, and this greatness that we have inside of us is unique, and only we can hear it, and only we can know it's there. And the purpose of education is to find that greatness and enable it to be the most effective it possibly can be by giving it the tools to reach the most to reach its greatest extent. So for example, my son, he's really into robotics, right? So he is 6. So I could get on the bandwagon and be like, okay, he needs to know X, Y, and Z about all these different things at 6. This is the place he needs to go. But instead, it's like, okay, the only thing he really cares about is robotics. So somewhere in there is his greatness. I mean, is he going to be a robotic builder when he's older? I don't know. But something about robotics is singing to that part of him, of his greatness. So as the primary person helping him in his path for education, I'm going to try to expose him to as much possible of that elements of robotics as possible to see what's singing to him, what's he connecting to, right? And if I use the medium that he so loves, then eventually he's going to get everything else he needs, right? He's going to need to learn to read and write because he wants to code. He wants to code his robot. He can't code his robot if he can't read and he can't write. He's going to learn these things to accomplish these goals that he has inside of him. But if you start from the other way of just tick these boxes off, then what happens is that greatness inside of you just doesn't get developed. It gets squashed. I think it's interesting if you're looking back, if the transcendentalists had won, if their way of doing life, I mean, obviously, I don't necessarily agree with everything the transcendentalists taught, but I think they had something really powerful. And the movement was very interesting about the development of the individual and the self. Just if they had won out and education had been, finding that greatness and giving the tools to foster it, what would we look like? Maybe we'd already be on Mars,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, everything that you're saying really leads me to leadership education. And, we are Leadership Education Mentoring Institute. And I think about the keys for great education, that were given in the Thomas Jefferson Education book by Oliver DeMille, and how you're sharing all of these things that are in there, like these classics and, and these amazing classics that are really could change how we look at education. So how does leadership education help with this mind shift that we need? How can we change the education? How can we be part of this reformation that needs to take place in our nation today?
So I was reading the C.S. Lewis over Christmas just because I was trying to get into the Christmas spirit, and I decided to read C.S. Lewis. But he has an article, I think it's a book actually, it's called The Great Divorce.
Yes.
And the idea of the Great Divorce is this man dies and he gets on a bus and he finds himself in hell, and he gets on a bus to go to heaven. And on that bus, there's several other people who are trying to get to heaven as well. And so this man starts to observe all these other people who are trying to get from hell into heaven. and he watches all their different stories, and it's super fascinating to kind of see the progression of what C.S. Lewis thought maybe would happen when we die. But there's this one story where this dwarf, who was, I guess, a little person in life, and he clearly was married and had a wife, and she died first. And so he dies, and he comes up to her, and this whole scene unfolds where he tells her that she doesn't love him enough, and that she never really loved him because she did ever understood him, because nobody could understood what it was like to be with his disabilities and his problems. Nobody got it. And it was interesting because as this little person, or I can't remember what he called it in the book. He called him a little man. As the little man like went along and kept saying, nobody gets me, nobody understands me, like life is so hard that you never were there, you're never gonna get there, nobody's gonna get it. He just got smaller and smaller and smaller until he had a dog that was with him, and the dog basically just like swallowed him up and became bigger than him. It's very interesting. It's one of C.S. Lewis's more, I don't know, abstract books. While I was reading that, I had this huge epiphany. That's what our whole culture is. Nobody gets me. Nobody understands. You don't know what it's like. You're not this way. Like, we have this victim mentality of woe is me, or why am I this way, or how come this happened to me, right? Just like you were talking with the coddling of the American mind, right? We have this victim mentality, and it literally shrinks us to the point where we cannot even like function ourselves. So I think the first thing that people have to do, no matter if you're listening to this and you're 10 or you're 90, you have to take responsibility for your own education. If you're 40 years old and you're not in the job you want to be in, and your life's a mess, and in your family life's a mess, then you have to take responsibility. You have to take responsibility. Like, you're right, nobody gets it because I have to get it, and I have to be the one responsible. I think that's where you have to start. And especially if you're a homeschooling parent, we worry so much about educating our children, but we like literally do not do anything to educate ourselves. And so we have to, I really do believe that's the first step that happens. Like, you have to be showing your children that education matters by getting one yourself. And so for me, like, that's the first thing that you do. If you want to revolutionize and change education, then focus on what you can, which is yourself, right? And take responsibility. And then the next thing, people are like, okay, well, I'll just go to college. And it's like, well, maybe not. Like, maybe if that's what you need to do, yeah, but like, maybe just turn off the TV and not watch Netflix, and get an Audible account and start listening to some books. Or if you can't read and you don't want to read, you know, start there. You know, that would be my suggestion. It's really simple. But a next suggestion I would have is just come to a Lemmy training and teach a project. Like, I don't think that there is a better way for you to get educated than to teach,
Oh, definitely. Well, and one of the wonderful things about taking on the responsibility of teaching a class for your homeschool community is your kids see you. You are being an example to your kids. I know that as the mentor or the teacher for a class, I am learning so much more than the kids are. And I get so excited about what I'm learning. And so I can share that excitement. But my kids are seeing that as well. We so many times we're like, okay, well, you know this, you have 4 kids, 4 little kids. It's hard to homeschool. You have all of these things that you're trying to do. You're trying to potty train one kid. You're trying to make sure that another kid has enough books that they're actually excited. They're not just sitting in front of a screen all day. If you have animals besides that, you're like making sure the animals aren't getting out when the kids are out trying to get some kind of exercise so that they aren't destroying your house inside. I mean, all of these different things. And it's like, okay, and now you're asking me, okay, Tati, you said I have to work on my own education. I have to read books like Thoreau and Emerson and C.S. Lewis and, read The Great Divorce about heaven and hell. And I'm not going to teach my kids all of this stuff. Why do I need to do it? Well, you got to do it because you're showing your kids that you are contributing to your community. You're helping build a community. You're teaching your kids that this is what you're supposed to do. This is what adults do. You're also finding your own mission through this, because that's what leadership education helps you with. It helps you, by going through all of these classics and by putting yourself out there and being part of a community, you are becoming more of who you are. You're finding yourself within that. And yeah, it's hard because you're also doing, cleaning up the poopy diapers and making sure the house doesn't fall down and making sure your kids aren't starving and making sure that you're educating them. But when you're part of a community, it makes everything else a little bit easier. At least I know that's been my experience.
Yeah, I think I listened to a Hiding Place during the pandemic. I listened to the Hiding Place. And I don't even know. Oh, because my community asked me to read it. I read it for our gathering project that we did the first year that we were running. And so it was like 2020. Yeah, it was last year. I had read that book at 16 for a colloquium that I had with just friends. We had a weird group of friends where once a month one of us would pick a book and then we'd have a book discussion and then a party. It was totally run by kids, and we just had a party with book discussion once a month. It was really fun. So I read The Hiding Place as a kid, and in my mind I was like, this is just a story about horrible things that happened in World War II, and so I didn't want to read it. I was like, I've read it, it's horrible, I don't want to read it. Like, that was my mentality. But because I was in my community and my community was asking me to read it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna follow the community's guidelines. I read it, and it was absolutely transformational for me, having just gone through the pandemic and experiencing some pretty difficult and hard things through our family. Suicide, we experienced like family fissures, death, like so many things during the pandemic. So many people experienced that terrible things through pandemic, right? Like so many people did. I walked away realizing Corey ten Boom's book was not about the concentration camps. Corey ten Boom's book was about, you have to figure out how to live a good life so when the world falls apart, because it will, you'll have the supports you need to make it better. And that's really what it was. Like, so much of the book was about her mother and her father and what they did to build community and how they nurtured the people in their lives when there wasn't a war, when it's just life, and how aware they were. And so because of that, like, I've tried to do that better with my children. And so in our community, I've tried to show them that, like, people matter, community matters. In our church community, when we have the opportunity and I go out visit the sick or the people, I bring them with me, right? And we just recently visited one of our good friends whose mother was very, very sick, and we went and visited them for an hour. And as we're driving home, like, my daughter's like, this is the coolest experience I've had in a long time. It's like visiting a 90-year-old person. Like, how, it's like, yeah, it just was so cool to hear their stories and listen to them and like see what they had to tell us. And thanks, Mom, that was so awesome. So it's like, when we focus on things that to the rest of the world, and this is one of the things that I also think is really hard to be saying, because if you're on YouTube out there, there's so many videos are like, this is how you get fit, and this is how you get, this is how you get rich, and this is how you get these things. And it's like, okay, what is the purpose of getting rich and fit? What is the goal there, right? It's to achieve some state of being, the good life. But in the process of getting rich and fit, we just like just go down this path of obliteration and we get rich and fit and there's like no one to share it with and we have terrible lives. So it's like, I think there needs to be a step back on YouTube and other platforms to just be like, listen, the attainment of wealth and things is really a very big lie. Because I mean, I have a very fulfilling life, in my opinion, but I spend almost every waking minute of my life doing things that does not bring me money. Right? Like, it does not bring me wealth. There's no wealth involved here. And yet I have a very fulfilling life. right? Not
Well, I
that
mean,
wealth is a bad thing to pursue, but it can't be the pursuit of wealth for wealth's sake.
I just want to say, I believe that wealth is fulfillment. If you're talking just money, that's a totally
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
thing. So if you want to be rich or if you want to be wealthy, okay, Tatiana, you're one of the wealthiest people I know because you are living a fulfilling life. You have this rich, depth to your education, and you are sharing it with other people. You are very wealthy and you have the love of so many people, and you've impacted so many people's lives. Now, your bank account might not show that, but I would rather have that kind of wealth. I mean, like my mother, again, she is a very wealthy individual because she has so many people that love her and support her. And I mean, she has literally just taken a plane ride with someone and they are her friend for life. And she just has that wealth of that love that's surrounding her. And she loves that. But I know other people in my family who believe that money is wealth, and they don't have that love in their life. It's kind of like going back and comparing the two educational systems. If you're just checking off boxes, if you're just trying to get to that money, it doesn't have that fulfillment. It doesn't have the depth and that wealth, where if you are helping your kids become lifelong learners who are pursuing and listening for that mission, that calling in life, that purpose that they're going to live. I mean, yeah, we're going for that wealth. We're going for having our kids live that life that is going to be fulfilling. I mean, I love it. Like Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. After reading that book, I'm like, kids will ask me, I'll say at the end of class, and I'll say, okay, are there any questions I can answer? Do you have any questions? And there's always that one kid. There's always that one kid. Yeah, Mrs. Christensen, what's the meaning of life? And I'm like, I have the answer to that. Do you want me to share it now, or do you want to go to lunch? And they say, oh, we can wait. But it's that sharing that genius, sharing that purpose with the world. It's not just about you. Where if you're focused on the money, if you're focused on being rich, it's all about you. And that's why having that community that held you accountable for reading that book, because you knew that that would be something that the community needed and would enrich you. I mean, that is wealth. That is wealth.
I think I bring that up just because I think going back to like, you asked the question, how do we fix things? I think we have to fix things by focusing on what really matters. And while I do want my children to be successful financially because they know how to use their money well and because they're well educated in that. I mean, while I, my husband and I don't have a huge bank account, we have a very secure life because, we are smart with our money. We've chosen to be on a single income, which does make life a little bit more difficult in today's economy, but we have been really, really blessed because of the decision and choice we made. So while financial stability is something I want my children to enjoy, I'm not pushing my children to be these high achievers because I want them to be like the best concert pianists and the best of all these things, because there's so much lost in that pursuit. Now, if I had a child who I could easily tell was like, this is their thing, music is their thing, yeah, I would work everything I possibly could to make sure that happens. But in the pursuit of the end goal, or the checking of the boxes, when that's our whole objective, we forget that we're human, right? And that big part of helping a child leave your home as a functioning adult is teaching them how to navigate and manage their emotions. It's teaching them how to build good relationships with people. It's teaching them how to be honest and keep their word. It's teaching them how to multitask and manage their physical space. There's so many other aspects that involved education than just, can you do this complex algebraic problem? Or can you tell me what Dostoevsky thought about, Russian life in 1850s?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the educational system that, we have that conveyor belt type mentality. A lot of people feel that the LEMI continuum, all of the different projects that we offer for Scholar, is just another conveyor belt. Now, you've written a couple of those projects, you've experienced most of them. Why isn't it a conveyor belt?
Well, I definitely think there's just like we talk about the phases of education, and I mean, sure, we'll do some podcasts that talks more about phases, but there is a development that happens in the brain of the child as they progress and get older. So some of those projects are naturally going to be better for the younger kids in that group, and some of them are better suited for where the brain development is. So there is categories. Let's just say there's categories, right? We have the practice scholar and we have the apprentice scholar projects. So the apprentice scholar projects are not going to be a good fit for a kid whose brain and academic development is not there, right? But if they are there, then they should be able to take that class. For example, if you have someone who joins your co-op or your Commonwealth and they're 16 and you say, oh, you have to take Key of Liberty and Shakespeare and all these other projects before you can take this other project, then you're really doing this child a disfavor. And odds are they're going to not continue with your Commonwealth because you're not meeting them where their needs are and helping them progress through. So I also think it's really important to understand that while there's certain knowledge content within each project that we use to teach skills, abilities, vision, and mission, that knowledge content can be learned outside of that. Whenever I teach the projects, the goal is to not have them be experts in this field because they won't, like they're not going to get there at 12. The goal is to put in them in the foundation for the thinking skills so that they can learn and think, compute, and articulate and speak, and then go back and learn it again, right? And then they'll know how to like really understand it. It's this mindset of like one and done that's so damaging to, oh, I've already read that, I don't need to read it again. It's like, no, we're going to come back to this and go back to this and learn and grow in these different ways. So I think the LEMI, while we do call it a continuum, it's probably maybe better to look at it as like, these are practice scholar projects, these are apprentice scholar projects. So there has to be a level of maturity that's there in order for the student to get there, but that doesn't have to be a knowledge content. Yes, it's more ideal if they can start at 12 and go through the different things. I don't know. It's hard. I was absolutely floored how easy it was for everybody to completely submit and surrender all their freedoms during the pandemic. That to me was just like, wait, no, wait, what? Well, this is a First Amendment right. We have the right to assemble. There's nowhere in the Constitution that says, oh, by the way, you can revoke the First Amendment right if there's a pandemic. That was insane to me, right? And so, but one of the things that we've just been conditioned to think is that if I don't do it this way, I'm not okay. And the truth of the matter is like the right way is the way in which the most growth can happen for the child.
Yeah.
And the recommended way is sometimes the right way. But that's another thing that maybe we'll have to do like a whole episode on spiritual eyes.
Oh,
Like,
I think so. That's huge. I know I was just at a parent meeting for my community, and one of the people spoke up about how her son just learns a little bit differently. And it wasn't until he got into Georgics that he just came alive, because just how that class is taught, the principles and that entrepreneur mindset, it just really spoke to him, and he got it. And so it was somewhat the knowledge part of it, but if that child was forced to go from, one to the next, I mean, he might have missed it, because our community doesn't offer Georgics all the time. If you have a kid who you think might be more interested in Georgics, as, the knowledge base, and it might hook them, then, put them in Georgix rather than Key of Liberty. Even if everybody's telling you, he has to start with Key of Liberty, Georgix might be a better choice as a parent, using your spiritual eyes. And then also as a mentor, use your spiritual eyes. I talk to a lot of leaders of communities, and a lot of them are saying, oh, we need to have the kids go through the continuum in order. And I'm like, no, we are mentors. We are not teachers. We are not, school administrators. We are mentors. We are looking at each child. We are not looking at the standards. We're not looking at, way it's supposed to be. We are looking at each child using those spiritual eyes and figuring out, where is that child now? Where does that child need to be? And how can we help them get there? And too often it's so easy to just get caught up in, okay, and I know as a leader of a community, I've been in that situation. It's so much easier if we just go with the standards, which goes back to what I was saying about, the standards that public education have. It's to make their life easier. It's not to make the kids' life easier. It's to make the administration and prove their value and validate, why they're around. That's why we do everything right. We are.
Well, okay, I'm going to push back a little bit on that though, because the logistical facts of like there really is only so many people in our Commonwealth, and there's only so many trained mentors, and there's only so many, we have limited resources and limited time. So let's pick a project. So let's say you have to pick a project that maybe is not at the same level as some of your other kids. Let's say you pick Hero and Sword because you've already done Key and you don't have any new kids or whatever, but you have kids who really academically aren't really going to do well or ready for a Hero and Sword, right? So then you decide, okay, well, they can't be in the project because they're academically not going to do it. And this is where, like, okay, this is really kind of what really difficult with project learning. I personally love project learning. I think it's one of the most powerful ways for develop the mind so that we can think in a whole to part to whole, which is essential for any kind of problem solving ability, right? Which is pretty much what humans do best. But at the same time, there is this idea of achievement because this goal, right? We have this project and we have this goal. And that's built in because, Mises' hierarchy of needs, we're action oriented, right? So humans act to see results. And so we want that result at the end, which is the goal. But what often happens is that the physical, tangible goal becomes the goal over the really important goal, which is the internal growth of the child. So then the label happens that if the child doesn't complete the X physical goal, then the child, the parent, and the mentor failed the project, right? Which is just so absurd because that's not the goal. The project is set up in a way to motivate that child to choose to learn, right? Because we understand that Mises is like, we are action oriented. We want to see cause and effect and results. That's how we operate. That's how economics operate. So we're going to use that principle of human nature to inspire the child to want to learn. In this case, it happens to be a metal sword, or in some cases, it's a painting, or some cases, it's a trip, right? It's some kind of tangible thing, right? But then your identity gets tied to that. Mm-hmm. And so then if you don't accomplish that because of various different choices you made or various different things that are happening, then the mentor freaks out. Oh, I'm a terrible mentor. I failed them. The student freaks out because, oh, I failed. And then the parent's like, oh my gosh, this doesn't work. This project learning is a joke. If you don't force kids to do things, they don't learn. And now it's embarrassing because we failed. And that's like, that to me is the saddest thing because, my niece, who's totally academically capable of doing all the work, didn't get it done in time, right? So she almost didn't get it. And I asked her and I said, how do you feel about it? She's like, well, if I'm really honest with myself, I know why. I struggle turning in things because my ADD brain just spazzes out. So I learned that in order to be successful with keeping deadlines, I have to set up certain systems with myself. Like, oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. How do you feel about yourself? She's like, well, I'm a little bit sad that I didn't do it on time and didn't get it, but I'm more grateful for what I learned reading Uncle Tom's Cabin and I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I did not realize how hard of a decision and thing this was for both the North and the South. I did not realize the impact this has on our lives, everything today. And well, we live in a state that was, highly affected by the Civil War and still is. And so, like, she could see how things in her community, things in our city, things surrounding us, things that affect her every day were impacted by the events that happened 150 years. Right. So there was the learning. That was the growth. That was the goal. She checked off that box. She also learned it's like one amazing woman could change the history of the world, right? Like that's such a powerful story for her as a young woman to learn, right? And so the message that has to happen between the mentor, the parent, and the child is how you package the message. Are you a failure if you don't accomplish the goal? Because you tried to accomplish the goal, and look where you got. I had the best education opportunity, which I'm so sad it's not around anymore, but the school that I went to only used mentors. And one day I had a mentor meeting with my mentor, and I approached him and I said, you really need to change the syllabus. Most of these kids can't do this work. I mean, we had to read War and Peace in a week. We had to read Les Mis in a week, like not the abridged version, the entire thing. We had to memorize every single country in the world in a week. Like it was just insane things. Like and then your old exam, I would just ask you any question, any country, and then you'd have to name like all the countries that touched it. Like the academic work that was required was through the roof. Like we read all of Nietzsche. We had to read Rothbard and Keynes and Galileo and like all this stuff. And none of it was abridged, and none of it was. It was all like thousands of pages of work a week. And so I came to my professor, I was like, you do know that like half these students are failing and not getting this all done. And like only a few of us are there. And he, he took his marker and he said, Tatiana, if I put this marker where you can't reach it and you jump as high as you can to reach the marker, you're going to jump way higher than you would have jumped if I had just set the marker where you could reach it. So here's the deal. I know that most of these kids are not going to get this. They're not going to get it. But here's the deal. I know you could get there. If I set it high enough, I know you'll work really hard and get there. So I'm not teaching this class to the bottom. I'm teaching this class to the top. And what's going to happen is every single one of those kids who didn't think that they could reach the top, they're going to get 10 times higher than they ever could have trying to reach for the bottom. And so like that's I think as a mentor to me, it's like I'm going to find the kid who is going to submit to what I want them to do, and I'm going to push them hard. And if we drag the rest of those 12 kids in the class along, then those kids are 10 times higher than they were when they started. And that's the victory. And sometimes a mentor, you have to turn around and just tell the kids, look at everything you've gone. Look at where you were and look at where you are now. That is the end goal. But it's just people don't see that as like, oh, I didn't cross off the box. I'm not okay. And to me, that's the saddest part of like the mindset of the education world. You are not okay if you don't cross off the box. But I really love Charlotte Mason. I just read a book called Modern Miss Mason. And one of the things she says is the mindset of parenting has to have is that when your child comes to you, they are a whole, complete, and perfect person from the beginning. So it doesn't matter what you do or what you don't do. From the beginning, you're perfect. We just have to discover that perfection through education.
Yeah. Back to that genius quote that I shared from Einstein. Everybody is genius. And I totally agree. I have had so many experiences where I've had a student fail and they have learned so much from that failure. I've had people accuse me of setting our kids up for failure. And I always send them back to that classic call with Anelity and Tiffany, Language of Freedom. And I'll be sure and link it in the notes because it's an amazing classic call that's available on LEMIWorks. It's everything that you've talked about here. It really does make a difference. And when you're working within a community, you have to make the hard decisions. I know as a community leader, I had to make those hard decisions about what is best for my community as a whole, even when it was not the best thing for my child. And I had to know that because I had faith in that continuum, in each of the individual products and in each individual mentor, because they went through LEMI training, and I knew that it had a foundation on true educational principles. And I knew that even if my child wasn't in the ideal project, that they would still get, they would still check off those boxes that I knew they needed, that I know they need to be that good person, to have that true success, that true wealth, rather than checking off those boxes just to get to the next thing and forget everything else that that they've done. They have that education of wealth, that education that will lead them to true success. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for that, all five of my kids have had that and know that failure is a part of life and they've been able to fail. That's one of the things I love about like the simulations that we do, the simulations that we include in every single one of our trainings for the adults is you can fail, and we can simulate failure and have them go through that and learn from it. And that helps them so that when they encounter failure as an adult, they're going to understand, oh, this is just part of life. It's not failing unless I stop trying. I have to keep working at it. And I love the acronym, FAIL is first attempt in learning. And if we can teach our kids that, I mean, that is like one of the best lessons.
I have to remind myself of this all the time. Like, it has to go back to working on yourself. Because as a homeschool parent, if your children don't look like the best possible result, the rest of the world, you know that they're going to blame you. You know that they're going to be like, oh my gosh, you're such a bad parent and you're failing and all these things, right? So like really it has to come to that place of like working on yourself. It's like, these are truths that I know. And I am doing the best possible thing I can do with the truth that I know. And one of the best piece of parenting advice I ever got from my sister, we were talking about her son wanted to wear sweatpants. They looked really nice, but they were not like slacks. They were sweats to church, right? We come from a more strict culture for what you wear on what's appropriate for Sunday dress wear. And she said, so I totally let him wear these. They weren't like trashy sweats. They were nice looking, but they were definitely, sweats. And she's like, I got in so much trouble from my husband because he's like, don't you understand that everybody's judging us about what our kids are wearing? And my sister, because she's autistic, she was like, why would someone judge me about what another person is wearing? My son is a person who gets to make choices about what he puts on his body. And why am I being judged for those choices? She just, in her head is like, well, he's old enough to choose. So if he makes this choice, it's his choice. How is that my choice? How is that my responsibility for the choice that he made? And it was such an eye-opening experience that I think only someone who's, autistic and thinks differently could see the world that way, where it's like, yeah, like once my child is of a certain age and making choices, how is that a direct result of me? You know what I mean? Like, as much as there is, I mean, nurture and nature are that huge debate, but the fact that when it comes down to it, that person, once they leave your home, is making choices based off of themselves. And, I think so many millennials are like rat on their parents, like, I have childhood trauma. And I'm like, okay, you probably maybe do. And that probably your brain has less serotonin and less synapses. But the fact of the matter is, you're you. And you have to make choices for you. So you got to figure out what you're going to do to fix you. As much as you want to throw your parents under the bus and tell them you ruined my life, like, doesn't matter. So fix you. Like, so the same thing as goes the other way around as a homeschool parent. It's like eventually gets to this point where it's like, that's your child and they're going to make choices for themselves. So the sooner that you can let that go and let them make them choices and own them, and then not care what the world says, the happier you will be.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and as homeschool parents, we are constantly being quizzed. Our kids are constantly being quizzed.
Okay, I gotta share with you the best moment I think of my mom's life. Okay, so I didn't learn to read till I was 11 or 12. Like literally, I knew how to read, but like I couldn't like read. And so as soon as I turned to be 11 or 12, I started being able to read. To me, it felt like this cloud lifted and my brain could work. I mean, my mom did everything. We did music, we did brain gym, we did like everything. I knew all the vowels and all everything. I knew all how it all worked. I just couldn't put together. So I started reading at 12 and like I just took off reading. Like the first real book I read, like not listened to or anything, was like The Indispensable George Washington. And then the next book I read was like Animal Farm. And then like like really weird books. Like it kind of shows you what kind of person I am. But anyways, my mom is the ninth of 11 children, and her older sisters are all public school teachers, three of them. One of them is a university professor, and her husband and her lived in California, and her husband was this ex-military, hard-nosed, always gave my mom's life, like was always mean to her, always teased her, always hard on her, just because that kind of a guy. And he was in city government, so he was a brilliant, really smart man. And my mom, uh, she made wedding dresses for all of her nieces because she's really good at making wedding dresses. And so periodically, when one of the nieces would get married, she would go down to California where my aunt and uncle lived, and we would go to the garment district and pick out fabrics for wedding dresses. So my mom took me with her when I was probably like 14, 15. I think I was 15, yeah, to the garment district because I wanted to go because I'd never been. So we stayed with my uncle and my aunt, who have my mom's entire life, especially when she chose to homeschool, ridiculed her, made fun of her, and told her it wouldn't work. Okay. And my aunt and uncle, they are a lot older than my mom. And so they had no kids at the home. And so they were hosting a visiting professor from Eritrea who was teaching at a university in California. Okay. So we're in this home, and I'm a 15-year-old kid. And after dinner, and we had been shopping all day, I'm in the living room, and I just sit down next to my Uncle Jerry and this really amazing professor from Eritrea and just started talking to them just because, that's the social thing to do. And my uncle like looks at me, and I'm having this like total conversation with this professor, like, like really well. And so my uncle's like, this is weird. So my uncle just starts dropping, it just starts quizzing me and drilling me and nailing me and like all this kind of questions, like all over the board everywhere. And I just thought we were having a conversation. So I was just like talking to him like I would talk to like any of my mentors or any of my friends at Commonwealth. And like on any topic, he'd do science or, anything. And I would just respond with what I knew and how I could, right? It got pretty late. And the professor, he looked at me and he's like, wow, kid, you're something. And then as we're leaving, my uncle's like, you know what? You did well, Anelody. I've never met a kid this well spoken and this well articulate at this age. Good job, Anelody. And like I just thought it was like whatever. Mom, the way home, my mom was almost in tears. She's like, you have no idea how much that man has made my life a living, AG double hockey sticks. And in one conversation, you blew his socks off and proved to him that in the 4 years you've been able to read, you've gone into college level, right? Like so whenever people tell me it's like, oh, my kid's not there, my kid's not there, it's like if you create the right environment. And the thing was like it wasn't just me who could do that. All of my siblings can do that to various different extents. I think when you live the right principles and you foster that greatness in your kids, eventually at some point that recognition will come.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely, I had in-laws, I had a brother-in-law very similar to your uncle. And it wasn't until my oldest son graduated from the same college he went to, you know, like cum laude or something like that. He's like, oh, maybe this stuff does work. And he was able to have a similar conversation with my son. And yeah, then it was like, okay, Heidi, I guess you're doing okay. But you have to, it works. You know,
You had to
if you're,
wait 20 years.
yeah, yeah. But it does work, but you have to understand that there's lots of different facets to it. It's, you know, you're working on your own education, just like your mom was. I know she was. She was working on her own education, setting that example for you. She also had a community that she built to have those mentors for you that would support her in what she wanted for you, but also support you in what you needed. And you had that group of peers that had that positive peer pressure that was, you know, helping you have that motivation to do more. And Lemmy, with its continuum, with its projects, with its support for communities, helps us achieve that good life, helps us as parents put our kids on the right trajectory so that they can have that truly wealthy life, that true wealth, that true living a purposeful life, living your mission. And that is the what I hope eventually the rest of the world will be able to catch on, is that this type of education is what we really want. We don't want those, you know, artificial standards that are given to us right now in the current educational system, where we have kids that can't read and are going to be held back. When a system is saying that we aren't doing well enough, so all of these kids are going to be held back, they're admitting their own failure, but blaming it on the kids. How sad is that? Where instead allowing those kids, I mean, with Lemmy and with leadership education, we're able to allow the kids to fail, have that first attempt in learning, and allow them to build on it until they get to the place where they get that exponential growth that you experienced when that fog finally lifted and you were able to progress with your, you know, with your education. Your mom never gave up. She kept laying that foundation, and that's what we can do. So now we have actually gone over. I think we could probably continue talking for at least another 3 hours, but let's end it here. This has been so much fun. Tati, I'm really excited to go on to the next subject next time.
Yeah, we'll see you again.